Well, listen, I was thinking about who you are as I was last night in the middle of the night, wondering what I would say to you. And my sense of who you are is that you're business people who care. Or you have a lot of other things you could be doing right now. And if you're here, it's because you care. And you're workers in the field, day in, day out. You are very brave law enforcement because you're looking to see how this crime of prostitution and I'm going to use prostitution with trafficking. The overlap is so high. And so you're looking at how this crime actually is part of a web of crime. And it's very, very, very tough work. And then most important, there are people here who are the experts. And they have expertise like nobody else has. And those are the women, several of them spoke to you yesterday. These are the women who've had the experience of being bought. So the research says that you actually started around age 14, 15 on the street. Some of you started a lot earlier. And it also said you didn't have a sense of choice. So I want to, I tell your stories, actually, when I speak about this. And I'm not going to tell your stories today because you're here and you're telling your own stories. But I want you to know that I try very hard to be your voice. And I honor you. And I thank you so much for being here. So much. We could not do this without you. I'm going to speak to you about a couple of roles. I want to be authentic, and I didn't want to overlap with all the things you all heard yesterday. And so I'm kind of like a preacher, aren't I? I like, one of the television evangelists walking around like this. I know where I am. I'm in Georgia, so like yesterday, it being Mother's Day, I was with my kids, or on Sunday, and I was with my grandchildren. And it was so sweet. They were all together at one big table, and I have to give you a hug. It's so good to see you. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you for all great work.
Oh, I adore you. You know I do. Thank you. Excuse me, we had a moment here. I'm so glad you came. I'm so glad to see you. I introduced you once in Denver when you were speaking on mental health, and I remember getting my heart attached to you, not just my head, like Marianne, the same thing. That was 20 years ago, by the way. Anyway, so here I am. You got to picture me. I'm sitting at this table with my kids, and it's very, very sweet. And so now you're thinking about, this meeting, about the harm that happens to kids who get picked up on the street, who run away from foster care, and a pimp picks them up, et cetera. And the juxtaposition is so stark between my experience Sunday. And I'm from Dallas, and the police there are working with girls and women who are being bought by truckers. And there's a police officer who's going and collecting DNA samples. And he's saying to these girls, look, you were born with a name, you should die with a name. You were born with a name, you should die with a name. It'll be so much easier for your families to get closure because they are 18 times more likely to be murdered. Now, that's our reality here. But I don't want to go on about that to you because that harm is obvious to us here today. So let me try a different way to get to it. Is this mic okay? Okay, so let me try. Now, I actually am a Southern Baptist, or not really now, but I was raised Southern Baptist, and it's really important to me. And now I go to a black church in a tough neighborhood in Boston. And I love it. And so what happens is the preacher will say, and Jesus has saved you from your sins. Tell your neighbor, Jesus has saved you from your sins. Save me from my sins. And people turn around, they say this to their neighbor, and it's just sort of, they feel really involved. So I'm going to do that this morning. Okay, and y'all are going to do your part. See, I say y'all when I'm here. Y'all are going to do your part, and you have to do it, or else I'm going to keep asking you over and over to do it, right? Peter, you have to, I'll do it with you, because you're over here by yourself, okay? No, we're friends. Okay. So I want you to turn to your neighbor, and here's what you're going to say. You're going to say, I've got a secret to tell you, okay? Hey, Peter, I've got a secret to tell you. You got a secret. Okay, all right. Gosh, I thought I was going to have to work and work to get you. You all go to the same kind of church I go to. Okay, all right. Now, okay, here's the secret. And I want you to turn to your neighbor and say, my son's a John. Okay? Do it. My son's a John. Yeah, my son's a John. My son's a John. Okay, right. Okay, right. Okay, all right. Now, here's the next one. This is hypothetical, maybe. Okay, and I want you to turn to your neighbor and say, my son's a pimp. Okay, my son's a pimp. Did you know my son's a pimp? Okay. Okay? Okay, we're just going to do one more, okay? All right, everybody, turn to your neighbor and say, my daughter's a whore. My daughter's a whore. Now, here's my question. Did you all hear what happened in the room? It got lower and lower as you did that. So what I want you to know, first of all, I want to know if it felt any different to say my daughter's a whore than say my son's a John, right? And what we're getting at is the difference between what's happening in your head as you understand facts and figures and what happens in your gut when you start experiencing it. And yesterday, when you heard women talk about feeling degraded, isolated, scorned, yeah, and you just experienced it because you had a very hard time identifying with your daughter being a whore. And by the way, whore is just slang, just like pimp is, just like John is. But it feels so different, at least to me. So these women are telling you the truth. Now, in addition to being a parent, I'm also from the corporate world, from Dallas. And so I want to talk to you, particularly the Rotarians, in business terms here. When I was a diplomat over in Central and Eastern Europe, like Marianne was talking about, that's when the trafficking started because communism imploded, the economies were destroyed, and all of a sudden people didn't have jobs, and the guys were trafficking the women and girls over the border into Poland, into Frankfurt, et cetera, into Vienna. And that's when we started using the word, actually, trafficking, like drug trafficking, right? And Mark knows all about this. Thank you for being here, Ambassador Lagon. So this was a business. It was a business like you all have or not like you all have, because it was based on trickery, and it was vile. But it was a business, and it had demand and distribution and supply, just like in your businesses. So get your head into that. This business has grown exponentially. It is second in organized crime only to drugs. It's on a level with guns, right? Huge, huge, huge billions of dollars every year. And one of the reasons is, unlike drugs, we're talking about human bodies. And they are a reusable commodity. How does that sound? Okay, so here's the question. And yesterday you were wrestling with this. If we have this demand and supply, with the distribution, then where do we intervene? Well, Ravi, you were talking about all that Rotary is doing to build up a society in which girls won't be so vulnerable. And so we're talking about how do you end poverty and how do you lift girls in particular out of this low self-esteem. And I'm not saying it can't be done, but it is going to take a century to do that. And we're committed to it, but the UN made all these development goals and wasn't able to do it. But we got to keep trying. I'm not saying not to do it. I'm not saying not to rescue women and girls. I'm not saying that all. God bless people who do. That's the supply. The distribution is the pimps. The FBI takes that on. They get so excited if they have a sting, and pick up 12 pimps. But the pimps in Atlanta are averaging $13,000 a month. They can afford any defense lawyer in the world. And they do. And you know what? These cases that are so carefully constructed, FBI loses a lot of them. So it is where angels fear to tread. I don't even get near that, because I can't do anything. The women make terrible witnesses. They're looking at the only man they've ever called daddy, you know? Like, so it's a tough, tough scene. So supply is, it's going to, as I said, it's just almost unimaginable how you're going to get very, very poor girls from being sold, right? And the distribution, it is so difficult to bring a case against the pimps. So that leaves you with demand, but how on earth are you going to intervene with the demand part? I mean, that's the men. Well, it turns out that they actually are very, very influenceable. Very. In fact, we did some research on this in Boston. 71% said that if they knew their car was going to be impounded, they would stop buying. I mean, please. If they knew their car was going to be impounded. Okay, I'm sorry, that just gets to me. 79% said if they knew that a family member was going to find out, they would stop buying. Then that has to do with the shame. So you have to get into their heads there. Well, all of this means you have to disrupt the business, right? That's what this is. It's a business. You have to disrupt it, and you do it by going right to where the guys say. You know? But all of those interventions depend on their being arrested. And if they think they're not going to be arrested, then none of this works. Okay, so I've talked about myself as a parent, talked about myself as in the corporate world. Let me talk to you about political, because I'm also really political. I won't go into my partisan politics. But I love my country. I'm political because I love my country. And I see that as a way to make a difference. And I'm not talking about being liberal, progressive, or conservative. In fact, this is the issue in Congress that you can get a coalition around. That's fabulous. The right and the left come together. And we ought to seize on an issue like that, given our gridlock. But in Congress, one of the things that they're saying is you cannot commodify bodies. Now, there's no price for someone's dignity. There is no right price. So think how deep this prejudice is. And I'm just telling you out of my own experience. There's this whole idea, it's a question, can a prostituted woman be raped? Now, that's so interesting to me, because when I first read about, well, here's the rate of rape of prostitutes, I thought, well, what do you mean rape? I mean, they've already sold their body, and even I had trouble with that. I am really embarrassed. My staff has never heard me say this. I'm really embarrassed about that I couldn't associate rape with being a prostitute, because they had already sold their rights to be used however that they would be used. And the men who buy them, the buyers often are thinking in those terms, right? So what is the price of human rights? Because there's a human right not to be raped, right? So what is the price? How do you sell your human right? Isn't that interesting? I mean, you can't sell your human right, but that is what is happening in this situation. So it's very much a human rights issue as well. And there is, when you think about this, there's a coarsening of conscience, that happens in our world, in our society. Every single transaction of buying sex shapes us individually, shapes our society, shapes our country, Ravi. Every one of those transactions, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands every day in our country, in the US. So I teach, as Mary Ann said, I teach public policy at Harvard. And it's really, really interesting about, do people have the right to sell their bodies. If they say, well, this is my choice. I'm putting myself through graduate school, et cetera. Well, did Benita talk about this yesterday, about slavery, the time of slavery? There were slaves. When the U.S. said, okay, we're not going to be a slave country, okay? There were slaves who said, actually, it's working for me. The master has put my kids through school and did the same thing with my parents. And I have food on the table, and I know where the food's coming from tomorrow. Please do not mess with this. And we said, I'm sorry. We're not going to have slaves. We just said, as a country, we're not going to do this. So what we did is we impinged on the rights of a few people in order to have a greater good of the majority. Because you could have said, well, they have a right not to be slaves. That's their individual right. So the question is, how do you form public policy? Well, you don't form it around the exceptions when there's so much harm being done. Right? So it's a false argument. Don't get sucked into that trap. And you don't solve it by legalizing. Because once you legalize the buying of bodies, what happens is it attracts the illegal because you're attracting buyers. Buyers do not go up to women and say, I want to make sure that you're legally supporting this, and I want to make sure you're not being pimped, and I also want to make sure that you're over 18. I mean, you look like you are. Well, please. I mean, my 13-year-old looked like she was 19. I hated it. But what can I do? It attracts. It's just like a magnet when you legalize. Don't do it. Don't go there. It's a bad idea. Okay, now no society's perfect, right? Every society's making compromises all the time. But let me put it this way. If you all, business people or anybody, had a machine and it was mangling people who used it, but it only mangled 1 in 10,000, would you keep it? Would you let one person in 10,000 have a crushed arm? I don't know. Let's say the machine was doing good things, making medicine or something. Okay, well, what about 1 in 1,000? How about 1 in 100 who's being crushed by it? What about 1 in 10? Can you imagine it? Can you imagine 8 in 10 who are crushed? That's what we're talking about. That's what we're not responding to as a society. About 8 in 10 girls and women who get sucked in this are crushed. They are mangled. So I feel a real urgency about this. And unlike President Carter, I am aging. And I just had my 85th birthday. Actually, it was my 65th birthday. I just had my 65th birthday. And so, let's get this done. This is not rocket science. This is not rocket science. We know how to do it. We know what the law enforcement people need to do. We know about political will. It's exactly what you were saying. It is about a group effort. We know how it takes the whole society to come together to keep the pressure on. We know why you have to have media supporting. We know why you have to have the mayor involved and the DA. Okay, now the problem is this is not for the faint of heart because it's very, very tough work. This is a whole movement that we're talking about. And there is opposition. You think about the civil rights movement. You think how much opposition there was. My father was part of the opposition, I saw it up close. Martin Luther King was a communist. By the way, did you realize that? Anyway, I knew it from every night at the dinner table. So there is opposition, except this opposition is organized crime. And if they are not coming after you, if you don't have ferocious opposition, it means you're not being successful in your work. How's that for a paradox? If you do not have horrible, ferocious opposition, all kinds of lies, all kinds of legal actions, all kinds, by the way, who's paying for that, right? If you don't have that coming at you, you're not on the edge. You're not pushing hard enough. Anyway, we have established through demand abolition these 11 cities. This is so doable. We have 11 cities who've come together. We call it a CEASE network. Let me see if I can do it. Cities Empowered Against Sexual Exploitation. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you. So we have these 11 cities, and each one is building their own strategies. So they're different from each other, but they are going to reduce the demand transactions in their cities by 20% in 2 years. That's stunning. And we're helping them know what the tactics are, how to measure them, et cetera, and they choose which ones they're going to use. Well, I told you how I'm unlike President Carter. Like him, I am egregiously hopeful, and I am chronically optimistic. It's the only way I can live. It's in my DNA. How many of you are egregiously hopeful? Okay. Oh, good. Oh, good, because we've got a movement. Oh, movements are so hard. It is so hard to do this, but it can be done. So yes, part of it is shaping public opinion, no question. But I am just not that patient. Patience is not one of my virtues. So y'all work really hard on shaping public opinion. What I want to do, I want to say the buyers right now this afternoon can stop. They really can stop. And Nick Kristof from the New York Times, he's a friend. We were talking about this. He said, Swanee, this is really doable. You arrest X number of guys and you publicize it like crazy. You don't have to arrest them all. You just make sure that the risk is higher than the reward. That's really what it's about. And when 79% say that if their family member found out, they would stop, take it seriously. And law enforcement people, this ought to really energize you. So first, they have to get arrested. I was talking to all kinds of people in the federal government. They said, yeah, we have zero tolerance, but they have to be arrested, and then they'll lose their job because they can't get their security clearance. And the same with the Department of Defense. They will be kicked out, but you have to arrest them first. So you can't leave it to the feds in terms of their zero tolerance. We have to do it at the local level. Okay, the penalties when you arrest, it does not have to be vengeful. You don't have to lose yourself. You don't have to lose your soul as you do this work. It can be actually restorative. And there's a beautiful example. Department of Justice paid for a study in San Francisco that was over a decade, and they were putting the men who were picked up in a 1 to 2 day, what they call John School, and it's a very simple idea. These 50 guys are sitting there, and they're from all walks of life. And so public health person comes in and says, here are the diseases you're going to get, and the cops come in and say, we're going to get you again. And a woman from the life comes in, and she said, let me tell you what my life was like when I was 8 years old, and 16 years old, and 24 years old. And no, you know what? I didn't enjoy having sex with you. I really, really didn't. And that's where you get actually this dramatic decrease in recidivism. So let me end this by saying that I'm going to give you a true confession. I've told you about roles I have. The true confession is that I have loved far too many men. I had a good time. One of them said, think of all the joy you spread around, Okay, that's the truth. And so when I hear boys will be boys, and I think about the men in my life, I think, boy, that's insulting. I would never say that to a man that I loved. Boys will be boys. Like, you can't control yourself? Please. So I see us in this room, each of us. I see us part of building a movement. And that movement is you giving men a chance to be men. And as you do, and as I do, we are building safer neighborhoods, the social level, but at a personal level, we are awakening our empathy. It's so important to awaken your empathy. And if we do it right, without the vengefulness, we then are discovering our better selves as well. So thank you all so much for letting me be part of you and be part of this movement with you.